So coming to the basic ANN flowchart. So here, as you can see, there are two figures which denote a normal nervous system of our brain and the artificial neural network in the virtual world. So initially, the flow of the ANN begins with the data collection, where we collect the various data sets like the input and the output parameters so that we can train the artificial neural network. In the artificial neural network, there are three major steps that we follow. 1. Training of data. 2. Validating the data. 3. Testing the data. So I'll give a very simple analogy to explain what I'm trying to say with respect to training, testing and validating. So consider that you enter an image of a cat into the neural network, so that it can identify whether the image that you have entered is actually a cat or not. So what are actually the properties of a cat? A cat can be brown, black, blue, with different color eyes and with whiskers and a tail. But what if you enter the image of a tiger? And what if the neural networks, and how will the neural network learn that it is actually a tiger and not a cat? This can be done by actually influencing the weights, which is weight initialization. Now this weight initialization can be done using various following various distributions, which include the Xavier-Gorard distribution, the uniform distribution, the uniform normal distribution, the uniformly biased distribution, etc. But we generally use the uniform distribution for the weight initialization. Like suppose the tiger is also a type of a big cat, which is orange in color. But we know that a tiger cannot be classified into a cat because of the kind of predator it is. So for this purpose, we tend to influence the teeth parameter of the hidden layer so that it can be activated due to the weight. That a tiger cannot be classified as a cat because of the large teeth that it has. So this is what weight initialization is. Coming to the activation function, so our output is highly triggered by the activation function. So activation function basically fire a certain output value that we'll get. Suppose let us consider that the cat has whiskers, but they have generally the normal cat has smaller whiskers, whereas the catfish has larger whiskers. So what it will do is it will activate the function smaller whiskers and will provide an output of a cat. Whereas in case if the input is a larger whisker, it will activate a 0. That is, it is not a cat. So this is what an activation function done. I'll be explaining the types of activation function in the later part of my presentation. Coming to the optimization algorithm, so it is not always that a neural network is always true. Consider that since we have been existing, we were told by our parents that this is a cat. So we fitted the image of a cat into our mind. But there are various kinds of cats existing in the world. So what we do is we keep on training and updating the data that we have in our mind about a cat. We see a black cat, we see a blue cat, and we update the data. So then after the training of the data in our brain, the moment we see a cat and the moment we see a tiger, we can easily identify which actually is a cat. So this can be done by training the data set, which is done by the activation function and the weight initialization. But where does the role of an optimization algorithm fits in? So whenever we get a certain output, it is not always necessary that the neural network will guess the right value. And for this purpose, we use the optimization algorithms in order to reduce the errors that are actually occurring between the actual output values and the predicted output values, where we calculate the root mean square error or the mean square error, and then we minimize these errors, which are generally termed as cost function in the terms of neural network. And further, we go into back propagation because because every mistake the neural network is making is because of the weight initialization parameter, because that was the basic idea behind choosing a certain picture as that of classifying a certain picture as that of a particular animal that we are suggesting. So in back propagation, we go back in the network, we change the weight in values so that we get a certain output that we want. the error between the actual output and the predicted outputs can be reduced to zero. Now this backpropagation keeps on occurring for a number of iterations or epochs. So these epochs are basically run until and unless these y bar and y have become equal, and further we plot the errors. Histogram of the errors, and we plot the R-square value for the various training, testing, and validating data set. Now there are various models for an artificial neural network. One is the feed-forward neural network. Two is the radial bias function neural network. Both are mostly the same. The only difference lies in the feed-forward neural network and the radial bias function neural network is that in a feed-forward neural network, we can use any activation function or any of the activation function or optimization algorithm. Whereas in the case of a radial bias function, we generally use the radial bias function, which is e power minus xi square, in order to determine the errors that have been occurring. So in recent years, there have been a lot of use of both the feed-forward neural network as well as the radial bias function neural network in the geotechnical engineering with respect to both reliability analysis and predicting the rock mass deformation modulus. For our research, we'll be sticking to the feed-forward neural network for a better understanding and simpler approach towards this basic idea of predicting the output sets. So as I told earlier, I'll be discussing about the optimization algorithms and the activation functions. So in general, there are two optimization algorithms that exist, which include the gradient descent method and the stochastic gradient descent algorithm. So in general, both the gradient descent algorithm, as you can see with the formula itself, and the stochastic gradient descent algorithm are purely same. The only difference that lies in between these two is that in a gradient descent algorithm, we generally use only a small range of data. That is, the number of inputs for the data set is very small. Whereas in case of a stochastic gradient descent algorithm, the data set varies hugely, and this data is further divided into many data sets or batches, so that we can predict the various different output values for different mini data sets. So in general, we stick to gradient descent algorithm because in the case of a stochastic gradient descent algorithm, there is a problem with identifying the error, as there is a huge set of data and we have further classified into mini data sets. We have to look into each and every mini data set and identify which weight parameter has to be changed, which makes it again more tedious. Now, what actually are activation functions? So, as discussed earlier, these activation functions are basically mathematical equations which will trigger or activate the output values for a certain input values. So, these activation functions help us to normalize the output of each neuron that will occur. They might range between 1 to 0 or between -1 to 1 depending upon the mathematical equation that we'll be using. So, they are classified into 4 types. One, sigmoid. Second is the ReLU, rectified linear unit. Third is the hyperbolic tangent or tanh function, and fourth is the linear activation function. So in general, we stick to the use of our sigmoid function because of its smooth gradient and the bound output values and very clear predictions. Whereas in the case of a rectified linear unit, there is a problem of its leaky nature, although it is best suitable for the back propagation that we want to use. But at the same time, the data set is varying so hugely, and since it is not at all zero centered, we cannot get the major output data triggered by the rectified linear unit. Similar is the problem with the hyperbolic tangent function and the linear function, which is the very basic one. So this is my idea of a basic backpropagation neural network using a gradient descent optimizer. As you can see in the figure, there are 3 input data sets that we're using: X1, X2 and X3, and W1, W2 and W3 are the 3 weights that we are assigning to each of the input data set using the uniform distribution. So in the and there is only one hidden layer that we are using. So what actually will happen is Y will be the actual output and Y bar will be the predicted output by the neural network. So Y is equals to W1 into X1, W2 into X2 plus W3 into X3 plus the bias or the human error that we are inducing into it. So basically the loss function using the gradient descent algorithm will be y minus y bar whole square. So since we are so since we have to reduce or minimize these losses, we use optimizers, and here we have used the gradient descent method for our function. So we go back into the network, as you can see in the figure, from y to y bar, and we change the weights w4, w1, w2 and w3. For this purpose, the new weight that will be assigned after each epoch will be the initial weight minus the learning rate into the partial derivative of the loss function. So learning rate is basically a very small value, generally ranges between 0 to 1 into 10 power minus 3, and isn't of much consideration, but obviously we are using it in order to tell the neural network about the errors that have been caused by us. So after each of the epoch or iteration, the weights for all the nodes will get updated for all the layers, and the loop will go on until and unless these losses will turn out to be 0. This is also a backpropagation neural network with the 4 input data sets and 2 hidden layers that we have used in order to predict the output. So the loss function remains the same. The only thing that varies is the partial derivative of the loss function, which I have derived here to update the weights. And this is the literature review that I have done. I have done a literature review of about 7. I have mentioned 7 papers, and in my project report there are 10 more. So the first paper that I studied for carrying out my project was the experimental investigation on the dynamic properties of the various grouted sand done by Dan Hong Hasio and other researchers. So in this, they basically determined the effects of the shear strain and the confining pressure on the basis of the type of the grout that is used and the curing time of the grout that has been used. So they found out that there was an increase in the shear modulus of about 1.4 to 2.6 times whenever we change the concentration of the sodium silicate cement grout to about 3.5 to 5%. And there was an improvement factor of about 2.5 and 3.7 obtained for the sand grouted silicate cement grout with a 3.5 and 5% cement concentration change. And this conversely meant that the cement or the silicate cement grout will significantly increase the cyclic stress ratio as well as the shear modulus of the sandy soil that was initially given for research. The only limitation of this research that I found was it did not consider the temperature ranges that will be there during the curing time as well as initially. At the same time, they didn't even consider the viscosity or the flow behavior of the grout as well as the geocomposite that was formed. Coming to the second paper, it was about the properties and application of a newly chemical grouting material, which was done in 2019 by Xiao Yang et al. So they basically developed an orthogonal design in order to predict the specific to use the specific ratios of the main agents, the auxiliary agents, and the catalysts and foam stabilizers to predict the values to predict and test the values for density, viscosity, curing time, and the foaming capacity of the grout. So they determined that they used about 15 grouping characteristics of the grout, among which they found out that group 3 and 4 were the best suitable for the testing, as their compressive strength varied between 20.16 MPa to 17.76 MPa, and the foaming capacity increased from 1589% to 1819% respectively. So from their research, it was proven that this new grout can not only serve as a reasonable material to provide high strength and excellent waterproofing quality, but at the same time is safe with no pollution to the environment and can provide a convenient synthesis method, which is very good for a structural reinforcement for the existing structures as well as for the new ones to prevent the leakage as well as the seepage prevention. Coming to the third paper that I studied for the research was about the estimation of viscosity and yield strength of the cement grouts at the true ground temperatures based on the flow spread test. So what actually is a flow spread test? In a flow spread test, we generally we generally bring the grout under a conical flask or under a conical apparatus, and we press the conical apparatus with a certain measured pressure so that we can determine how the grout is behaving, and we measure the displacement that has occurred between the original position of the grout to the one which has occurred after applying the pressure. So this will tell us about the flow behavior, or in general we can say the flow spread test tells us about the viscosity of the grout that we are using. So this paper by Zipang Zhu actually aimed to propose a simplified method to approximately estimate the initial yield stress and the viscosity of the cement grout for the rock structures, and the temperature that was used was between 12 to 45 degrees Celsius in order to stimulate to the true ground temperatures in general for the rock masses for a maximum depth of about 1500 meters below the surface. So they basically developed two models, which was the Lewis model and Laplacian model. So the Laplacian model basically failed due to the absence of the plastic behavior of the cement grouts, whereas the Lewis model successfully got triggered by the flow spread test and gave them the right values. In contrast, the yield stress could have been linearly correlated to the measured relative flow area values, which wasn't done in this research, which is the only limitation that I found. Also in this work, they found that the dependence of the yield stress of the cement grouts on the relative flow area was highly exponential in nature, and it offered an alternative solution that could be used by the technicians to control the seepage problems of the deep grouting mechanisms. These are the other few research papers that I studied for my project. These include the use of ANN and MVRA in our ANN, MVRA and SVM support vector machine, which we won't be using for our project. Where the major objective of all these three research works were that they studied the effect of polymers and their microfine properties to predict the rheological as well as the mechanical properties of the grout using the ANN and MVRA as a predictive tool. And among these, they actually found out that MVRA is not a technique which is best fit for their research, and ANN was found to give a correlation coefficient ranging between 0.9967 to 0.9984, which was highly appreciated. Also, they used the major parameters that we have to consider later in our research, which was the radius of injection using the regression analysis. So I've also done a dummy analysis of the various data that I got from the previous literature review work that I did, and even I too found out the similar results. But the only problem with the dummy analysis that I did was that I didn't have the data for the ANFIS or adaptive neurophysiology inference system to get a predictive value. Also, this dummy analysis I think lacks the actual use of data that has to be given to an artificial neural network to predict the values. As since I've used the multivariable regression analysis too, I found out that we cannot actually apply MVRA to such a huge set of data and such huge input parameters, as we have to keep some parameter or the other constant for a certain while in order to get the real-time correlation values. So until now, the work that has been done is the literature review and the dummy analysis, and the work which has to be done consists of the dummy analysis of the data from the other journals and research papers, and to get the real-time data from the lab, and to create the ANN models for bringing the predictive set and applying the various predictive tools that I discussed earlier in order to predict the properties as well as the correlation, so that we can find the best fit model for our research and predict the groutability of the grouts that we will be using in the lab data set by using ANFIS and the compressive and to determine the compressive strength properties as well as predict them for our future. So as I discussed earlier, the only limitations that I found in my work was that this MVRA couldn't provide us with the suitable relations, and they failed to take into consideration all the consideration of all the parameters of the input, which makes it difficult to compare it with the ANN and other model prediction tools. So these are my references. Thank you.